Back in 2011, Japan went through one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. And in response, it did something drastic. It turned its back on atomic power, shutting down every single reactor in the country. But today, something pretty remarkable is happening. The very nation defined by that nuclear trauma is making a surprising and, a very controversial turn back towards the atom. So what's behind this incredible shift?
Take a look at this. This is the Kashiwazaki-Kariwa plant, or KK for short. This isn't just any power station. It's the largest nuclear power station on the entire planet, with enough juice to power millions of homes. And after more than a decade of silence following the Fukushima disaster, its reactors are slowly but surely coming back to life.
And this, of course, raises a huge question, one that really gets to the heart of a global energy dilemma. After the trauma of Fukushima, why on earth is Japan plugging back into the atom? We're going to break down the really difficult answers in this explainer.
Okay, so to understand the shift, we first have to look at the comeback itself, because the symbolism of this specific restart, it's incredibly powerful. The restart of the KK plant is a massive, massive milestone. Why? Because it's operated by TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Corporation. And if that name sounds familiar, it should. That's the very same company that ran the Fukushima reactors. For this company to be the one leading the charge back to nuclear, well, that's hugely significant.
TEPCO itself seems to understand just how heavy this all is. A company spokesman actually said, "The greatest lesson from Fukushima is that there is no such thing as absolute safety." It's a pretty sobering admission, right? They're acknowledging the past while they try to build a new future, and this time, they're building it with new safeguards, like a massive 15-meter-high seawall around the plant.
But to really get why this comeback is so controversial, we need to take a step back and look at the journey Japan has been on since 2011. The country's nuclear story has been nothing short of dramatic. Before 2011, Japan was all in on nuclear, with a goal of getting half of its power from it. Then, bam, the earthquake, the tsunami, and the Fukushima disaster. In response, Japan did the unthinkable. It shut down its entire nuclear fleet. All 54 reactors went dark. And now, more than a decade later, the comeback begins. So what could possibly force such a dramatic U-turn? Well, Japan found itself caught in a perfect storm of energy pressures.
First off, the dream of a green energy revolution kinda hit a wall. Yeah, there was an initial boom in solar, but the overall expansion of renewables has slowed way down. It's been bogged down by politics, really strict building codes, and super complex land use rules.
Second, without its nuclear plants, Japan became even more dependent on imported energy. Now, as a country with very few natural resources of its own, this left it really vulnerable to global price shocks, like the ones we saw after the war in Ukraine.
And third, there are the climate goals. Japan has pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's a super ambitious target, and it's one you simply can't meet when you're relying so heavily on imported coal and gas. So you take these three pressures, you put them all together, and they force what one expert calls a nearly 180 degrees change in the policy. The government started pushing way harder for a nuclear revival, and often that came at the expense of support for renewables.
This whole situation leaves Japan stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's now facing two very different paths forward, and let me tell you, each one comes with its own huge set of problems.
The trade-offs here are pretty stark. I mean, look at this. On one hand, you have reviving nuclear power, which has to deal with deep public mistrust and the very real problem of an aging fleet of reactors. But on the other hand, expanding renewables is getting choked by political hurdles, tough regulations, and slowing construction. There is just no easy answer here.
So what's making the nuclear path more politically possible now? In a word, time. As one anti-nuclear activist put it, the memory of Fukushima is fading. The younger generation, well, they just don't have that same visceral fear of the technology.
You can see this shifting perspective, even at the local level. For leaders like the mayor of Kashiwazaki, where the KK plant is located, the whole calculation has changed. He now sees climate change as the bigger, more immediate threat, and nuclear as a necessary, if imperfect, tool to fight it, at least for now.
But here's the thing. Even with this renewed push for nuclear, the math for Japan's energy future looks incredibly difficult.
The government's official goal for 2040 really highlights the scale of this challenge. The plan calls for nuclear power to provide 20% of the country's electricity. That is a huge jump from under 10% today. And hitting that 20% target? Wow,
That's a monumental task. It means Japan would have to successfully restart nearly every single one of its remaining eligible reactors. That is a huge political and logistical challenge.
And here's the bigger problem. This is a short-term solution, at best. Most of Japan's reactors are old. We're talking built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Even if they get their lives extended, they will have to be decommissioned in the coming decades. And building new ones, that's even more difficult, way more expensive, and takes decades.
So, what's the long-term plan? Well, it's basically a series of really ambitious bets on future technologies. Japan is hoping for breakthroughs in areas like nuclear fusion, harnessing the power of the sun, as well as next-gen solar cells, hydrogen fuel, and advanced geothermal power to finally solve its energy puzzle.
But what if those bets don't pay off in time? A longtime government energy advisor puts it bluntly. If these new technologies don't show up, Japan will have no choice but to keep filling the energy gap with the one thing it's desperately trying to escape: imported fossil fuels.
And that leaves us with the final, critical question. Japan is caught between its traumatic nuclear past and a really uncertain energy future, basically relying on aging reactors as a temporary bridge. The real question is, can new technology arrive in time to solve what currently looks like an impossible equation?